Excellent. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Salesforce Migration Journey in China webinar. If you're here for another webinar, you're in the wrong room. With that, I want to start by a quick disclaimer. Specifically, we're not the representation. This is all confidential and proprietary to InCountry, Copado, and Salesforce. As you can see, this is a fairly long statement, but I think the important part is the information contained in this presentation is a general guidance only. This does not take this as legal advice. You should have your general counsel or legal team review anything that you would like to do in these areas. But with that said, we will have a copy of this presentation to share with you if you so desire. So all of this will be stated in there as well. So first of all, we're very fortunate to have a group of great speakers today. I'm here as a Chief Strategy Officer, as your moderator, but really the focus is on our three great speakers here today. And let me start by introducing them. First, we have Adam Sellers, who's a Senior Director of Global Technology Partnerships for Salesforce. Adam's professional career spans 25 years in various IT and business management roles. He's an excellent communicator, and I've seen him before, so I can say that from having a lot of experience watching him explain these things. He's got a great track record of bridging the divide between technical and commercial conversations, and that's really key in these areas, as you all know. With experience in technical solutioning, people and process management, and bottom line P&L responsibility, he brings a wide range of experience to bear to deliver holistic, innovative solutions to modern business problems. Sorry about that. All right. He's also an established keynote speaker. And again, I've seen him at a number of the Salesforce World Tour events or Dreamforce. And now he's really bringing his experience to bear on product business development role for the Alibaba Cloud partnership, as well as solution engineering efforts for customers looking to onboard in China. And really, we're lucky to have him. He really has a good sense in the details here. And that's really what we wanted to get into today. As well, we have David Brooks, Senior Vice President of Evangelism for Copado. And David's the lead evangelist for Copado. He's a serial entrepreneur who has worked at, get this, 6 startups with 3 successful exits over 40 years. And I defy you to find someone else with that kind of track record. Twice as CEO and founder. For 23 of those years, he's worked in the Salesforce ecosystem as a customer, an ISV partner, as an employee of Salesforce. He joined Salesforce in 2005, really right at the beginning of all this stuff, just after their IPO, to help build the app exchange and ride the rocket ship for the next 9 years. During that time, he ran a third of Force.com, the teams that are around sharing, admin, packaging, licensing, and provisioning. He briefly managed Flow and Sandboxes as well. He joined Copado in August of 2018 to establish a product management organization, and he grew the team for over the next 5 years. In 2023, he transitioned to a role in the marketing organization where he writes blogs, news articles, but most importantly for our day today, he leads the Copado China initiative, and that's really key for what we're going to go through today. Finally, we have Peter Prose. Peter Prose, our VP of Customer Success for InCountry. He's actually on the ground floor of a lot of this stuff, actually doing and working directly with customers, helping to incorporate InCountry's data residency platform, dealing with all the cross-border data flow issues into their enterprise applications. He previously ran solutions engineering for Sappho, a high-growth startup that was acquired by Citrix. Peter began his career building technology platforms for financial services companies like UBS, Barclays Capital, and Evolution Financial Group. And with that, I wanted to get you a sense of the agenda of what we'll be covering today. So we'll talk a little bit about the team, the companies involved. Really, the why we're here question, we'll also get into that. Then we'll get into the migration journey, and really we're going to break that down into 2 parts so that you get a good sense for not only the tasks involved, but what each of our companies brings to bear for each of those areas. Next, we'll go into what happens after migration. And I think that that's really important for everybody to get a handle, that the journey sometimes continues on beyond that, especially when you start thinking about keeping the applications up to date, keeping the data in sync for the global org, and so forth. As well, we'll talk about the fact that, look, China initiatives are not just are about more than just a migration org, and Adam will touch on that. And then finally, we'll go through the key takeaways, and we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end of that. So as it relates to the team, sorry again, I'm going to do this. As it relates to the team, look, we want to really get the information out there that this is the right team that has built the various components that bring all of this together and make this a smooth proposition for companies considering a move into China, especially with respect to getting their Salesforce application running there. You've got Alibaba and Salesforce, who have developed a great partnership. You've got the #1 CRM partner with the #1 public cloud provider, and they have teams there that can work on this stuff. Copado, look, they're a leading player in the CI/CD tool space, DevOps tools. If you're an organization with multiple apps or multiple orgs, you're probably already aware of Copado, and if you're not, you should be. As you start to consider what's going to happen in China, they really are an important piece of the puzzle to make that a smooth process. And then finally, InCountry, we've been operating in China for over 2 years, partnered with Alibaba, dealing in the cross-border data flow issues for some time, watching the regulations as they've evolved and keeping up on those. And really today we're focused on our set of products around the migration process. And again, the details around what it takes and what are the steps to make that happen quickly and easily. So what are the drivers for action? Why are we all here? Well, really we break those down into 2 areas, which is data sovereignty and application performance. On the data sovereignty side, as some of you may be aware, the Cybersecurity Authority of China recently published an update to their regulations, really to clarify and set the regulatory expectations for companies operating in China. And as it relates to these regulations, you should always be aware that when they're talking about cross-border, it's about cross-border where it starts with citizens' data being in the country and whether or not there are parameters or constraints for what can leave the country. They have really begun to open up what is allowed to leave, but it all still starts from the idea that it's in the country to start and then some can leave. So that's really the perspective you should bring into this, that in looking at the Salesforce platform, you're looking at a way to easily make sure your data is in the country, and then what are the opportunities or constraints for what can leave the country. From an application performance standpoint, I don't think there's a lot to say here other than we know that for SaaS applications running through the Great Chinese Firewall, there can be performance issues. And so what we're really looking at here is by being able to have the Salesforce system running in China, you're really mitigating the performance issues for the teams that are operating there and need to have day-to-day access to the platform. And with that, I want to bring Adam in right now to really get into the migration journey. Adam, over to you.
Fantastic. Cool, thanks, Pierre. Great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm just going to start with a brief introduction about some of the steps that we put together, and we're going to walk through in the webinar today about what does your migration journey into Alibaba Cloud services look like. And it is on the surface a simple 4-step journey. And we're going to walk through steps to prepare your org, how to validate that everything's ready, into the migration, and then obviously into the testing phase as well, because the testing piece is quite important. Now, we have a technical migration guide that we can share to anyone that's interested, but it does walk through these 4 steps. And as we go through, we start where we think about what is the first step in the preparation, and that is to do a lot of examination, understanding of what your org current state is, and then understand how do you intend to do that metadata, that migration of the data itself, and then think about, well, do I need to do any syncing back out of China as well? You need to start to think about what is your as-is org type. Are you going to have a global shared instance, dedicated instances in multi-regions, that kind of thing? These are interesting conversations to have in regards to what do you think about your capabilities in region, and how is your governance structures going to sort of define that technology choice? It is one of those things where once you start taking technology decisions, they will be subject to how do you intend to govern the ongoing, not just the migration, but the ongoing running as well. And there'll be a series of workshops you'll want to have with your stakeholders, your users, perhaps even some of your customers, where you want to start to understand these parameters. Certainly decide, again, folding back into that governance conversation, who is going to be involved. Obviously, your internal team, your IT team, your architecture team, maybe some subject matter experts from the business, and then any system integrators or partners that you would sort of working with to implement your sales org as well. And when do you need to start? Well, probably as soon as possible. Once you've got that date where you sort of need to be into that program, you just need to reach out, talk to the Salesforce and Alibaba Cloud team, and we can actually help you on your journey for deciding that start date. Once you've actually taken that decision and you're ready to go, you've done your preparations, time to start validating your org. This is around things like locking the scope, and this is really important to ensure that your project for the migration has a clear and set end date, because you're going to want to wrap reporting and audits and all that kind of stuff around it, as well as identify some of the hotspots, some of the blockers, and plan the mitigations for those kind of things. Again, this will start to talk about workshops to involve what that scope is, identify, document all those blockers, and then document the mitigation plan. This is a good time to start testing the migration plans as well. Very similar from the involved parties. You'll start to look at IT teams, certainly bringing in the business teams for users and those kind of aspects. And again, before your project actually starts, you want to start to, 8 to 10 weeks out, just start to actually determine and start to set up some of these aspects as well. So that's sort of it from me from the first two steps. And we're going to actually hand back over to David, I think. And so walk through these tasks. Thanks, Peter.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adam. And look, I think that as Adam outlined these various steps, what we wanted to make sure you understood is that there's a way to undertake those steps, and between the Copado platform and the InCountry platform, we come together to deliver on those various tasks. And with that, let me bring in David Brooks. I'll let you take it from here, David.
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. So the good news is that after the prepare and validate tasks step, it gets easier. But the bad news is this is where a lot of your work is going to be done. You need to, first of all, you need to define your sandboxes and really create your development pipelines. And so you're going to need a pipeline for your China-specific data, a pipeline for your common data. And if you're like most companies, you have other regions in the world, there are rest of the world specific regional orgs that you're going to have, and you're going to need to identify that. So what you're going to do in the first step is, and it's a little bit tedious, but it's not impossible. It's just a little bit of work, is you need to go through and you need to identify and label your China-specific fields and objects and code and metadata, all of the components that are currently living in your shared org. Because most of the customers that we're talking to right now are starting out where the China team has been supported by an org that's outside. Sometimes it's even a single corporate headquarters org that everyone is out of. But now with China, you need to move into the Alibaba Cloud, and you're going to identify what are the things that are in your sales and your go-to-market motion that is China specific. At the same time, you're going to be tagging common, because what we found is that about 80% of the solutions out there in a multi-region, multi-business unit kind of situation is common to these things. So your sales processes are not all that different. It's kind of like DNA. Your DNA between us and the great apes was, it's very, very, there's a lot of commonality between us, but there are some differences that do make a difference. So Identify the common, identify the China, and then if you're doing this, you might as well go ahead and identify the rest of the world, because at a later date you may want to go ahead and move that metadata and data to those regions as well. But it's up to you. How much do you want to bite off at one time? We also highly recommend that you snapshot the source org, the metadata in your source org. We want to make sure that you've got a backup. Think of it, everyone is concerned about data backup, and you definitely should be doing data backup, but you also should be backing up your metadata before you start this process. So at least you have a rollback point to go to. And then as you're going through and separating these metadata, you're also going to be identifying and label configuration data. So let's talk about the difference between configuration data and other data records. If you look at a lot of the ISV apps in Salesforce, a lot of them rely on data records as configuration. And you need to identify what those configuration data are, because in general, those are not governed. They're not personally identifiable. It's not restricted data. It's basically telling the system, how do I configure applications such as CPQ and CNO and all of these other ISV apps? And so we need to make sure that we understand what data is configuration data and that you've labeled that as well. You need to take a look now at your China-specific metadata, and you need to identify any unsupported metadata that's out there and tag that. Salesforce have done a wonderful job of supporting the Sales and Service Cloud capabilities, fairly rich, and Adam can go into details in that migration guide. But there are some things that are not supported yet in the Alibaba Cloud. That'll be changing over time. It'll get closer and closer to 100%. But in the beginning, once you've identified your China-specific metadata, you're going to need to identify any of that that's unsupported in the Alibaba org, and you're going to need to find a way to overcome that unsupported metadata in the short term. It may require some modifications to the way that you're implementing some of these go-to-market motions. You're going to need to revise the apps and eliminate that unsupported metadata, as I've said. And then in the Copado world, the way we do deployments is it's user story based. So what you're going to do is create user stories for the data and the metadata, the configuration data and the metadata. And those user stories are going to represent the deployments that you're going to need to make through your pipeline and eventually all the way into your production org in Alibaba. So that's the work, and it's not a difficult task to understand. It is just there's a lot of detail and a lot of data and metadata. If you're a large enterprise company, there's a lot of work to do here. But the good news is it gets much easier after that.
All right, and with that, that's a really good segue into basically the first point for the in-country prepare and validate task, which is basically to ensure that the schemas between the global org and the China org are compatible with each other. So obviously, there's a lot of preparation work that David mentioned that goes into ensuring that the metadata as well as the schemas are similar enough that there can be a successful migration of the actual data contents from the source org globally to the org that's located in China. Next is basically an exercise to tag the records. So there's typically two scenarios that the companies are in. One is that they would have all of the China records commingled in a global org that everyone is using. And then the other instance is where there's actually a separate China-specific org that's isolated from the rest of the global org. So basically, if it's that global org situation, then there would have to be some tagging applied to the records that are China-specific. So a country field within each account and contact that says this is a China record. And the in-country migration tool would be able to filter based on criteria provided such as that, so that only those records would be moved from the global org into the China org. If it was the latter scenario where basically there's a staging org set up and all the records have to be migrated, then there would be no filters necessarily to be applied. And I will show you in a moment what basically those filters look like in an actual migration tool. The next step is to provide to set up the connected app, which is essentially the credentials required for inter-server communication between the in-country migration tool, which is hosted in one place, and then the Salesforce servers that are going to be acting in the migration, basically the source and the target orgs. This is a native Salesforce feature, which we're basically just leveraging this for very streamlined and efficient communication between the different servers to perform the migration. And then finally, the most important step is to prepare the migration configuration file. Under the hood, it's just a JSON file. You'll see what it looks like in a moment. But basically, what is included in there is the list of objects that are to be migrated. So just the standard CRM things, accounts, contacts, leads, things like that. But in addition to that, there's an optimal sequence of object migration. So typically, cases are linked to contacts and contacts are linked to accounts. So you would obviously have to migrate them in a particular order such that all of the relationships can be reestablished properly after the migration is complete. And then in addition to that, typically there are attachments associated with a lot of these objects. So once the object migration is complete, you would have to ensure that all of the files associated with all of those object records are migrated from the global org to the China org as well. We do provide basically multiple tools for doing this configuration setup. So there's basically two ways to do it. One set of ways to access the tools is directly through our APIs. And then you can use your own scripts and whatnot to build this configuration file. But alternatively, there also is a user interface that we provide within Salesforce to perform the migration. And then for building the actual migration configuration file, you could use a visual constructor, so basically a drag and drop tool to help to build out the migration sequence and whatnot. Or there could be a Copado data deployment template that would also be used here. So basically what you need to think of InCountry is just a very powerful tool set for performing this migration of millions of records plus the associated attachments with multiple levels of relationships between them, including circular references, to ensure that this can be a successful and seamless migration from one org to the other. So just a quick look at what that migration configuration looks like. You can see in this is just kind of typical JSON. The object in question here is the account object. You'll see that you can specify particular fields that would be migrated. So this goes back to the point about how the schemas have to be compatible. So you have to make sure that the same fields would be available in the same objects in the different orgs. And then you're able to apply filters such that the only records created after a certain date or tagged with the country field equal to China would be moved over. And any other criteria you want to include to ensure that only the China-specific records are migrated into China. And with that, I'll hand it back to Pierre and Adam.
Great, Adam, I'll let you take it from here.
Cool, thanks, Pierre. So that's kind of like, I think you get a taste of the main body of work seems to be, from talking to all our customers, there's a lot of work to be done around the planning steps, right? And understanding how this migration is going to work. We then look at how do we move into a migration point, and there's probably one thing that I kind of call out around the to-do section here as we start to think about actually working with these systems, and it goes to, I guess, the nature of the architecture in China in and of itself. You'll see here that the IP allow listing for Salesforce on Alibaba Cloud has these different domains. So Alibaba Cloud is the owner and operator of Salesforce inside the Greater China region, right? So it's essentially they are Salesforce in China. And you'll see that things like salesforce.com, the URL doesn't exist. So login.salesforce.com doesn't exist. There's two domains there, sfcrmproducts.cn and sfcrmapps.cn, that you'll need to allow this because the services in China are independent and unaware of each other. And this is where we start to say, okay, well, a lot of the tooling that we recommend people work with, like InCountry, like Copado, have kind of, they understand this really well, and they understand on how to talk between the global and the Chinese instances, because as I mentioned, they are unaware of each other. So it's something to take into account, and the team will go through this in the actual doing of the steps as we go next. But finally, the testing piece. Obviously, use the migration guide to build what your post-migration test plan is. I know Pierre's going to talk about some post-migration steps as well. The testing is much more than just the migration piece of itself, right? So remember, we're not actually doing a single one-shot project here. You will typically be looking to do a pipeline of changes and building some capability in how do you manage this multi-org environment across the firewall into China? How do you do that on a continuous scope? You need governance. You need governance of changes that happen from a global COE into China. You may wish to roll some of the changes that your team in China build back into your global common elements, all those kind of things. So start to plan about this future. What happens for ongoing enhancements? What happens with how do you manage exceptions across the two orgs? Because they will come up. And when I come back and you see me again, you'll hear me start to talk about some of the main differences that we can offer as you go into China. And there's some specific things around relevance to local Chinese channels that we want to stop and talk about. So let's jump in and actually listen to the migration stuff again from Dave.
Absolutely. Dave, all you.
Here you go. Well, the good news is, as I said earlier, once you've done all of this preparation work, in Copado, what you've set up is your pipelines, and you're going to have the China team and the core team pipeline set up, and deploying becomes really easy at that point. There is a user story or a user story bundle that has all of the metadata that is both China specific, and probably a user story that is the core metadata that you've tagged, and you've accumulated these things. And so the actual deployment is simply deploying them down the pipeline into the Alibaba Cloud. Now, don't get your hopes up, because all likelihood, you're going to have some things that you're missing in configuration on the Ali Cloud side that is going to prevent the deployment from working well. In the migration guide, I believe Adam has identified a couple of the configuration settings that are key. And so you can't really, it's not really easy to do this up front. You could literally have 1,000 or more deployment errors when you first try to do this deployment. And what you find is that it all comes down to 3 to 5 settings that haven't been configured correctly in the global settings of the org. And that's caused the majority of these things. So you're probably going to see a large log of deployment errors. You're going to fix those very easily by turning on the right permissions. And then you're going to try to do it again. And now you're going to get a small list of manageable deployment errors of things that you probably forgot. And you'll take care of that. You will address any of these deployment errors and rinse and repeat. So the good news is that the majority of these things will go away right away. And the next few may take you a couple of days to sort out. But after a couple of days of work, you've got all of the metadata in the Alibaba org that represents your core common application customizations and your China-specific customizations. And it's not going to be as painful as it was getting all the preparation work done. Back to you.
All right. So now I'm going to go over basically what the migration steps are within using the InCountry migration tool. So this slide will jump around a little bit, because step 1 here basically is everything Dave was just talking about. So copying the metadata and schema with the audit log and detailed reporting from the existing global org on the left there into the China org on the right. So basically that's that first preparatory step. And I'll certainly echo his sentiment that basically the work is definitely in the preparation. Once all the preparation is complete, then the tool set itself does most of the heavy lifting. So after that metadata and schema have been migrated over, Then it's a question of copying the actual China records, so the ones that have been tagged in the global org or all of the records in the staging org. Copy those records as is from from the global org into the China org. And this is where the in-country migration tool comes in, where I'll show basically how that's set up with the different tools that it provides. But it's basically takes care of the mapping, the relationships, the migration of the data, migration of the files. So that's step 2. At this point, there's a bit of divergence depending on what your situation is. So if you do have that staging org that contains all the China data, then you would be just decommissioning that org, and your users in China will just continue to use the China hosted org. However, there could be the situation where it is a global org, and there would be the desire for continued visibility into the records in China in some way with anonymization of the data that can't be stored outside of China. So in that case, we have a mechanism within InCountry basically to anonymize the China records, anonymize the regulated fields. So things like first name, last name, email address, those would be anonymized within the records in the existing global org. And then after that, there would be a package installed on the China org. This would be step 4, so that anonymized versions of any newly created records or any updated records could be sent back to the global org, so that there is this continuous global view of everything happening, but with only the aggregate data and the non-regulated data shown and available in the global org, while the users of the China org are able to see the full set of data, including all of the PII, PHI, et cetera, and have the full functionality of Salesforce within that China hosted org. Right. So this is a very high level diagram of what the in-country migration tool looks like. On the left is the global org sitting outside China. In the middle is the in-country migration tool, which is basically just a collection of applications and the associated files and logs and data stores that are required to perform the migration. This can be hosted on AWS. This could be hosted on a variety of different infrastructure available, because it's using relatively common tools, things like PostgreSQL database, things like that. And then on the right, you see the local China org. So there's basically 3 separate components that are involved in this process. So within the in-country migration tool, basically there is an extraction being performed of the data from the Salesforce org, the global Salesforce org. And within that in-country migration tool, there's basically that migration recipe, that JSON configuration saying which objects, what the field mappings are, and the relationships between the different objects. As the migration progresses, there are details that are logged within the in-country migration tool, so that you're aware of what is happening at every step of the way. If there are any errors, it can indicate where those are coming from and how they can be mitigated, and any retries can be attempted just in case there is disruption in the network. Obviously, most of the copying will be going through the Great Firewall of China, so there is the potential for the connection to be dropped, so there would have to be a retry to make sure everything is done properly. And then we're also maintaining a map within the migration tool of the old ID and the new ID, so that we actually have the ability to perform an initial migration and then a delta migration later on. So if you're performing migration on millions of records, or tens of millions of records, that could take a very, very long time, and you don't want to disrupt the day-to-day operations of the users in the global org. So by doing this initial migration and then a subsequent delta migration, because we have that mapping, you're able to ensure that you get a complete and accurate data set copied over to the local org in China. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like in practice, we've actually built a user interface for the migration tool within Salesforce. This is what it would look like for the administrator to set up the global and local orgs. So basically to specify the main org from which the data will be copied, as well as the Alibaba Cloud org within China where the data will be copied to. And then in this, we have the output basically of the migration steps. So you can see initially there's a step to extract data from the source organization. There are 10,000 account objects that are pulled out successfully. and then the connection to the target org in China is authorized. And then there is a load of the data, those same 10,000 account objects, into the China org. So you're able to see every step of the way, all the data being migrated. This would be done for all of the different objects, and then would be done for all of the associated files, all the files associated, the attachments for all of those different objects as well. Right, and once that is complete, then you move on to the post-migration tasks.
Great, thanks, Peter. And post-migration, so look, as we described, there's a number of steps that go into the migration. But the key is to remember that once you've migrated everything and your apps are running across in the Salesforce on Alibaba Cloud org, you still have the notion of maintenance, the notion of keeping things current, the notion of bringing new data or new capabilities to the app need to be brought in. So this is where post-migration activities are also important. And with that, let me turn it over to David to take it from here.
Thanks, Pierre. So as Pierre just mentioned, you basically now have your configuration in China. And if everything went well, you are now up and running on the Alibaba Cloud. You should probably do a metadata backup again at this point, just to be sure. Because what you're going to do next is what's called a destructive deployment. You need to eliminate the China-specific metadata. Now, this is going to involve custom fields on some of your shared objects. It could involve complete elimination of custom objects that were China-specific and custom settings and things like that. But you're basically going to eliminate that from the core the core instances where the core development is being done, as well as the rest of the world. All of these will still belong in the China team, development orgs, integration orgs, and test orgs, because in the pipeline that leads into the Alibaba Cloud. So you're gonna clean up the non-China related orgs and make sure that the China specific changes are going to be eliminated. Now, that, as Pierre said, it's not the end of the road, because more than likely you're going to have some, as business continues, you're going to have a continuous change in your go-to-market in China, and you will also have continuous improvements in your go-to-market in the core of your business. And as a result, you're going to need to identify what changes go where. In Copado, we have a user story centric development pipeline. And what that means is that the best way to make sure that you are routing these things in the correct place is to identify all of the China-specific changes. It typically will be done by a dedicated team. These people could be located anywhere in the world, in China, outside of China. They will do the work of the China customizations, and then you will probably have a core team that's working on your core business processes, and they will tag their user stories as common for the common pipeline. And the reason for that is not only will those changes have to be deployed into the Alibaba Cloud in China, but they will also have to be deployed throughout the rest of the business in your either your common production org, or in the case of large multinationals where you have multiple business units, multiple regions that you're supporting, tens of production orgs out there, your common core changes are going to get routed to all of the production orgs, and then your regional specific changes will go to only the region where they apply. And then you're pretty much done. You're going to set up this as an ongoing process. So DevOps is never done. You're setting up it's people, process, and technology, and so you're going to have the people segregated into the teams that are responsible for each region and each and core, And then you're going to have the process in place so that you're sure that as you're on an ongoing basis, as your business evolves, that the right changes go to the right place. And all of this is a pretty easy thing to do, especially with a tool like Copado, where you can tag each of the user stories and route them automatically to the right production pipeline. And back to you, pros.
Yep, thank you very much. So now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that situation I mentioned earlier where the China data was being kept on a global org. It has been anonymized out of that global org after migration to the Salesforce for Alibaba Cloud org. And then there is the desire by the global headquarters or the global business to continue having visibility into exactly what's happening in China. But not have visibility into the individual PII or PHI. So what we have built is what we call InCountry for Salesforce cross-border. The components involved basically are on the left, you have the local org in China with the InCountry SXB package installed. And then on the right, you have the global org. So basically what's happening is there is a configuration that is set up in that China-based org to say, these are the objects where there is an anonymized copy that we would like to export to the global org. And these are the fields within the object that we would like to export. And this is the anonymization strategy that we want to apply to each of these individual fields. So once that configuration is set, and it is a very simple admin interface that I'll show you in a moment, basically, anytime a user in that Salesforce China org creates or updates or deletes a record, there is an associated trigger that is called to copy the anonymized version of the data to create a record in the global org. So the users of the global org, they can't see the PII in clear text, but they will still know how many cases are coming in or how many leads are coming in. So they can still use all of the existing dashboards and reports where things are being viewed at an aggregate level. So they don't need to know that if people with a particular name are reporting a lot of issues with their product, but they do need to know if a certain number of people in Shanghai are reporting the same sort of issue. So once that data is depersonalized, then it's much easier to have that global visibility. The way we do that basically is within the package. There is a very simple interface where for the object in question, you can specify which fields within the object need to be copied over and what anonymization strategy is applied. There's a lot of flexibility there depending on what you want the data in the global org to look like. So it could be a hash, it could be a fixed string, it could be a masked value where you just have the first character and then a bunch of stars. Or you could just copy the data as clear text. So there is data that is permitted to be exported from China because it's not classified as regulated. So basically, once that preparation and classification is done and that configuration is applied here, then you would end up in a situation where long-term, within the country org in China, so for all the Salesforce China users, they would be able to see all of the clear text data for all of the records. But within the global org, the critical data, the data that is not permitted for export or storage, that would be masked or hashed. But the depersonalized data that is still important for things like reporting or analytics, like the source, title, and country at the bottom here, those would be still visible to all of the users within the global org. So long-term, post-migration, the global users would still have full visibility of everything happening globally from that Salesforce org, while the users in China have the full high-performance Salesforce experience with Salesforce on Alibaba Cloud. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Adam.
Thank you very much, Pete. So yeah, there's been a lot of conversation about some of the compliance reasons that you may wish to migrate. And there's one thing that sort of deserves a bit of attention as we discuss some of the reasons why customers are coming to talk to us about having a specific China strategy. So Salesforce has gone generally available with our core CRM in China on the 18th of December last year, right? So we bring our core CRM, which is Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and Platform, to market, hosted, and as I mentioned, owned and operated by Alibaba Cloud in the China market. Now, the thing that most of our customers are talking to us about is this idea of, yeah, we want to be in China, we have a compliance need to be in China, but there is so much that we should be doing in China around relevance. And that's relevance with China-specific services. It is a unique market. Things like WeChat integration is one that every single customer talks to us about. So what Salesforce have done from the product side is actually built a layer into the China version of Salesforce on Alibaba Cloud called the Connected Experiences Gateway. And this is where we deliver productized integrations with specific China services like WeChat integration, like WeCom integration. We've also built productized integrations with specific products from our partner Alibaba Cloud and their division Lingyang. So things in that space like telephony. So your contact center needs telephony. Telephony in China needs to be China hosted for performance and obviously regulatory reasons. We bring to market integration with a product called Quick Service. Everyone needs a CDP. Marketing journeys, how do you actually manage things like WeChat templated messaging, those kind of things? The way that you engage with a Chinese consumer in China is remarkably different to the way that you will do that outside of China. We do this through the Connected Experiences Gateway, and there are productized integrations, as I mentioned, with things like Quick Audience, which is the Lingyang CDP and marketing automation platform. Now, this platform is built by Salesforce engineers in Guangzhou, China, and it's updated frequently. We release every month to this platform, so we can actually stay on top of these evolving market trends, bring in new channels. We're having conversations at the moment to try and bring in data from things like Tmall, which is something that everyone in that consumer sales space is really interested in China. As I mentioned, it is our layer inside the product itself that will actually open up the Chinese channels to you in your China org. And once you've got these deployment pipelines in place, you've got your data anonymization in place, so you can actually start to then have a globally consistent view, but actually inside China remain really locally relevant to your consumers and your users in China that typically will operate and engage with customers on a much different set of channels than you'd see outside. So if we take a quick look at the Connected Experiences Gateway, you'll see that we can integrate directly into things like Alibaba Cloud. So things into their wider ecosystem, any services you might be running inside Alibaba Cloud, things like Quick Audience or Quick Service, which we mentioned. We do have productized integrations with WeChat and WeCom. The WeChat is typically, we see customers have a service experience through WeChat. Again, inside China, if someone wants to talk to your brand, they want to raise an issue about a product, a service, etc., they will start in your WeChat official account. Now, if you're not familiar what that is, think of like a Facebook business page. WeChat is ubiquitous in China. It's an absolute must-have. We also bring payment services. So into our commerce and payment services engine that lives inside the Connected Experiences Gateway, we integrate with things like Alipay, WeChat Pay, or even Union Pay as well. Last but not least, and these are all available today through the CXG, we have an integration with the Alibaba mapping service. So those of you that want to use maps or are using maps outside of China today, you'll notice that all the map integrations in Salesforce are actually Google Maps. Obviously, that's problematic behind the firewall. Your Google Maps connections won't work. So we've actually built integrations into the Alibaba mapping service in and of itself. So the key point here is that we've actually brought to market from a product perspective the tools that'll let you have that global relevance, so that global consistency, but actually maintain local relevance with your consumers in China as well. So back to you, Pierre.
Great. Thanks, Adam. That was great. So look, I think the key takeaways from this webinar and what we really wanted to get across is that, look, Salesforce and Alibaba Cloud have brought together the tools that allow for global consistency and local relevance in China. And they've done that in a performant platform, and that's really important. From a Copado standpoint, they've extended their marketing-leading DevOps platform to China. And that enables their teams to quickly leverage and extend the organization's apps for rapid deployment on Salesforce on Alibaba Cloud. For InCountry, we've been operating in China for some time, but now we've delivered a really easy and straightforward solution for migrating and keeping organizations' data synchronized between global and local Salesforce instances. So I think that the key message here is that these are the tools that can really help you meet the challenges to operating in China right now. And with that, I wanted to open it up to some Q&A. And while we wait for people to get some questions in, I thought it'd be great. I have a couple questions that came up while I was hearing a lot of this stuff. So let me throw some things out there. And Adam, let me start with you. You know, is there a key difference between Salesforce on Alibaba Cloud and Hyperforce in other regions?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there are. We touched upon one of them previously during the presentation. So the services are, as I mentioned, independent and unaware. When people talk about Hyperforce, Hyperforce from Salesforce is a brand that we use when we refer to our services running on AWS. The services on Alibaba Cloud is the first step we've made to a truly multi-substrate infrastructure as we provide the services and the product that Alibaba host and operate into that public cloud model. So there are differences. There are differences in that it's a different substrate altogether, which is probably the biggest difference. But you will find there are kind of two sets of differences in our services on Alibaba Cloud. Some are related to roadmap, and David touched on that before, as we bring services into a different substrate, we have to make some changes to make them work. So you will see some roadmap features that sort of we release over time, and those differences will narrow. But there are some that are actually regulatory. Things like AI, machine learning, those kind of things. Obviously, from a US software company, very difficult to export that stuff to China. So there are things from a regulatory concern that just will never change. So yeah, thanks for
That's great. That's great. Hey, David, you know, for companies that are currently running single Salesforce orgs, you know, they're going to now need to run a multi-org model with Salesforce on Alibaba Cloud, where that's the second one. How long and how much planning does it take for a company to adopt the Copado tools and to establish, you know, the processes and better manage that whole Salesforce development and deployment lifecycle? Like, if you had to guess, or from your experience.
Well, the good news is that a lot of the companies that are moving into China are already Copado customers. So they basically just create a new pipeline and put the sandboxes together, and the Ali production org and the connected app for the SSL. And that's a matter of a day or two. And then you get into the big work of separating the metadata that we went through earlier. If you're not an existing Copado customer, we generally see the installation of Copado and bringing it up is you know, a day or two. The biggest challenge is it's a people, process, and technology. DevOps is not just one thing, and so we typically find the customers want to move a little bit slower. They want to train their users, and they want to, you know, get their teams updated. And so you know, we generally see a week or two for customers to do a brand new implementation and get their metadata snapshotted, get the get repos in order, and it's not really the tool limitation. It's more or less the organization has to get their ducks in a row in order to move over to a different tool. It's, you know, imagine moving off of a CRM system onto Salesforce. It's you know, it's a lift and shift, and that's not always a tools issue. It's a lot of times people in process. Absolutely.
So Peter, let me ask you a question, and I think I know the answer, but because I haven't stayed on top of the latest and greatest, you know, with all the data handling that InCountry is doing, can it also handle like backup and restore? I mean, stuff like that. I mean, it seems like pretty straight on that same place.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if you think back to the diagram I showed where the global org is on the left, the in-country migration tools in the center, and the local org is on the right, you could very easily just swap out the local org for a local file server or local database. So essentially that data that is extracted from the extracted from the China org is just, instead of being shipped somewhere else, so exported, anonymized, or stored in another org, it could just be stored in a file server. And then later on, we could restore from that file server back to the Salesforce, for Ali Cloud instance. So yes, we can support backup, archiving and backup. Yep.
Excellent. Well, look, gentlemen, I wanted to thank you so much for your time. I know you're all leading busy lives here. and we really appreciate you coming on. Again, the key here is the devil's in the details, and really what we wanted to do with this session is come down to a more 1,000-foot level so that everyone can understand what's actually required to make this happen. So thank you very much, and thank you to the audience for watching this, and those of you who are watching this later. Again, I hope this information will help you. You can get in touch with any of us, and let me pop up the next one. Yeah. So this is email addresses for all of us here, and feel free to reach out, and we'll happily direct your inquiry to the right place or send you the information directly if we have it. Again, thank you everyone for your time, and have a great rest of your day or evening or morning or wherever you are. Cheers.
Thanks, Pierre. See you guys.